Welcome to Studio RC and an encouragement for your recovery and your faith. My name is Max and I am an alcoholic. We welcome you to our newest series as we kick off the new year 2026. We're going to jump into a series that I hope will encourage you and help you get off on the right foot for this year. Now, if you're listening today, chances are you didn't get here by accident. Most of us arrive carrying a story. Some parts redeemed, some parts still healing. The series we are kicking off for the new year is called Legacy Builders. And before we go any further, let me just clarify something very important. Legacy is not about status. It's not even about success per se. It's not about being remembered. Legacy is about what gets passed on because you were here. Let me say that again. Legacy is what gets passed on because you were here. In recovery, we understand this concept deeply. None of us heal in isolation. Someone carried hope to us, the people that came before us, sometimes imperfectly, sometimes quietly, but faithfully. Now, Scripture tells us in Psalm 145:4, one generation commends your works to another. Faith was never meant to be hoarded. Recovery was never meant to stop with us. It was always meant to go on. So in this series, Legacy Builders, we're going to explore what it means to live in a way that leaves something life-giving behind. Not money, not reputation, but faith, freedom, and spiritual health. And we'll talk honestly about things like mentorship and sponsorship, living for others, finishing well, and how everyday faithfulness becomes generational impact. This isn't about pressure, it's about purpose and being intentional. You don't have to be perfect to build a legacy. You only have to be willing. So wherever you are today, early recovery, long-term sobriety, questioning your faith, rebuilding your life, you are welcome here. So let's lean in together and discover more about how to become a legacy builder. Welcome to episode 4 of Legacy Builders, Leaving a Godly Inheritance. So we're going to jump in to our 4th installment here in Legacy Builders, and today we are going to talk about leaving a godly inheritance. First thing we probably want to do is redefine inheritance. When most people hear the word inheritance, they think about money, property, assets, things left behind. But Scripture pushes us to think deeper, because long after money is spent and property changes hand, something else remains. Values remain. Patterns remain. Faith or faithlessness remain. I mean, recovery teaches us this clearly. Many of us inherited things like chaos, silence, fear, or even addiction. And not because someone intended harm, but because broken patterns were passed down. So today, we ask a different question. What kind of inheritance am I intentionally building now? What kind of inheritance am I intentionally building now? In recovery, we learn that legacy isn't only about what we leave. In some ways, it's about what we interrupt. Some of the most meaningful inheritance are not are things that we pass on, but cycles we stop. And that's what makes this conversation filled with hope. Because legacy isn't reserved for people with wealth, influence, or perfect families. It's available to anyone willing to live differently, one day at a time. I think of part of my family legacy. I come from a family of recovery. My father got sober, which in turn, my sister got sober, and then I got sober. My children have never seen me drink, let alone drunk. My hope is that maybe because of what my father did and all the way passed down, that maybe it will be broken by the time it gets to my children's generation. And if it's not, they know about recovering, they know where to come. So even interrupting things like addiction or chaos or lack of communication, doing something different, changing the cycle is definitely a legacy and an inheritance. Let's look at a scripture today that reminds us that anyone willing to live differently, one day at a time, can leave a different legacy. Listen to what Proverbs 13:22 says. A good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children. So the grandchildren. Now, depending on where you are, you may think, oh, how can I leave anything for my children's children? I'm not sure if I can even leave anything for my children. Again, I think we're starting to skew back to money and property and assets for some of us. And this verse isn't about finances. It's more about foresight. It speaks to living today with tomorrow in mind. Living firmly one day at a time, but investing today in the future. When we live in the day, and we talk about day-tight compartments in recovery, we live today, like that's all we can live. But that doesn't mean that we're not planning for the future. I'll give you an example. All I can do today is what's on the docket for the day, what's on the to-do list today. That doesn't mean I'm not thinking about, like, let's just talk about Studio RC, thinking about the next series, or thinking about the next message, and how can I position myself, and what are some examples, and thinking about it, although all I can do is work on what I can today. It doesn't mean that I ignore the not thinking about it till the day of. I can do a little bit today to prepare me or to position me for the future, or a message at my local recovery church, whether it's RC Online or RC Marlton. I can't do the message before the time is to deliver the message, but I can prepare for it, and that's what we're doing. That foresight, living today with tomorrow in mind. Biblical wisdom consistently points us toward generational thinking. Like, the things I do matter to the people coming after me. That's a recovery concept. It's a faith concept. Although, how many of us said, I'm not hurting anyone but myself when I was drinking or drugging? Like, no, I'm only hurting myself. It's very short-sighted, because the truth is, it does impact future generations if we don't get sober. Choices made now bless people we may never meet. I think of my great grandfather, who I never met. I met my grandfather. My grandfather lived to 91, which was really awesome. But his father, my great grandfather, was a Baptist minister who traveled around the state of Alabama on horseback. I never met him. But his faith was passed on to my grandfather, who passed it on to my father, who passed it on to me. But he was someone I never met. But the importance of what he was doing, I come from a legacy of pastors and preachers, even though I may never have met them. That there's people you have never met that will be blessed by you getting sober, by you staying clean. That's the impact of getting sober and getting clean. A godly inheritance, it's not accidental. It's prepared. And preparation always requires being intentional. As we start the new year, part of why we're talking about legacies, trying to do things that matter and things that last. If we're not intentional about the things we're trying to do, um, it more than likely either won't happen or won't have the impact. If you're not intentional about your goals or the purpose or the things that God's calling you to do, and making time to make sure that you do those things that God is calling you to do, they probably won't get done. Notice the time horizon in this verse. Children's children. The proverb assumes you won't see the full results of what you're building. I think of some of the great churches in Europe, and I think they just finished one. I think it's in Madrid, Spain, and it's this beautiful, ornate church that they've been building for multiple hundreds of years. The person who designed it, the person who started the project, didn't see it to completion, but he put the plans in. It will be his legacy. There are things like that. And we don't always see the full results of whether it's the people or the things that we're building. I don't know about you. I want to do something that lasts. I want something that has impact, like Studio RC. I hope that Studio RC is going, strong long after I've stopped doing the podcast and someone else has picked it up, and maybe even long after I've passed away. These are still making impacts to people in recovery. That's a hope. That's a dream, a desire. I want legacy, the thing that I do to reverberate long beyond me, and not because I want this to say Max's Studio RC. I just want Studio RC. I want people to be helped. I want to be a part of something that helps people and other people pick up the ball and run with it. Much like we've done in faith or recovery, we've picked up the ball of where other people have left off. And it's so crazy that the proverb assumes we're not going to see the results of what we're building. It runs directly against our culture and our addiction, for that matter. We wanted immediate payoff, microwavable results all the time, even though in recovery we hear time takes time. Godly legacy requires patience. It requires humility. It requires trust. Trust that obedience today matters, even when the results are invisible. Step 3 tells us that we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. As we think about this step shifts the center of gravity. Life's no longer built around my preferences, my control, or my outcomes. It's built around trust of a higher power. The big book reminds us that surrender aligns us with God's care, not only for today, but for the long arc of our lives. A godly inheritance begins with when we stop focusing on and focusing or forcing outcomes. When we stop clinging to control. When we start trusting God with direction, the full nature of the third step. You can't pass on what you refuse to surrender. Many of us try or want to leave a godly inheritance while still living under self-will. Step 3 reminds us, it teaches us something critical. Legacy follows alignment. When my will is at the center, what I pass on, anxiety, control, fear. When God's will becomes the center, what gets passed on is stability, humility, trust, gratitude, vision. This is where recovery quietly reshapes generations. Now, what is a godly inheritance? What is that really? A godly inheritance is not measured in dollars. It's measured in integrity, faithfulness, consistency, humility, service. It's what people learn, excuse me, by watching how we live when things are hard. In recovery, this matters deeply. When we start cutting corners, that's at least a yellow flag, if not a red flag. When we start cutting corners on honesty, start cutting corners on responsibility, start cutting corners on living the right way. When people watch how we live when things are hard, people see the true us. It's, you know, I've heard we're kind of like tea bags. Our true colors come out in hot water. Um, I want when situation gets pressured, I want God to be coming out of me, and the scope and colors of God, not my own selfishness. Our children, biological or spiritual, inherit how we handle conflict, stress, disappointment, temptation, loss, losing. They learn what faith looks like, not from our words, but from our patterns. Daily obedience builds that generational impact. One of the things in recovery that I have discovered, or you know, you're at an event, maybe a family event, and you're trying to be good, whatever that looks like, and like you're not going to make that comment, you're not going to engage in that conversation, you're not going to debate, you're not going to fight. Like you're trying to be positive, you're trying to be encouraging, you're trying to be present, you're trying to do all these things, and you might have done it for multiple hours, but maybe you make one snippy remark, you make one comment. It's enough to ruin all the progress you've made. And sometimes the people in our lives that we're trying to do the right things, what they will see and remember is that one thing. Oh, Dad ruined it by saying, can you believe he said that? When I was like, doing great all day, and it's just that one thing. Yeah. It's not our words, not even our intention, our patterns, our actions. That's what people see, that's what people experience. This is what a godly inheritance sounds like. I saw my parents apologize to one another. I saw them ask for help. I saw them stay sober when it would have been easier not to. Those moments, they preach louder than any sermon could ever preach. And even if no one ever names it out loud, those patterns settle into our soul, which, whether it's the fourth step, where we start to identify some of those patterns or some of those things that we've inherited or embraced, or, we realize that. Intentional living is about making the small choices, but the small choices really leave long shadows, really have an impact. A godly inheritance is built quietly through choosing honestly when no one forces it. Or choosing honesty, excuse that as a value, as doing that when no one forces it. Not because we're in trouble, not because we have to get through something. Choosing faith when fear feels safer. Choosing consistency over intensity. One of the lessons I had to learn in recovery was I would see people get results when they were returning something or trying to get their way, and they would be really aggressive and they'd be angry and mad and yell. And that really wasn't part of my character, but I felt like a doormat, and I was somewhere between doormat and aggressive. And I was taught this lesson of to be assertive without being aggressive. You know what? This isn't what I ordered. I really love, the chicken instead of the fish, or whatever it is, rather than, yeah, I'll take the fish. That's fine, even though I don't eat fish. Or, I can be assertive without having to be aggressive. I didn't know that. I had to be taught that. We learn things in our recovery, how to act. When someone gives you a compliment, I thought I had to, give a false sense of humility. No, I didn't do a good job. I had to be taught, when someone gives you a compliment, just say thank you. I had to be taught these things. And now, hopefully, they're part of my inheritance, my legacy that I'm leaving. Recovery reminds us progress is built one day at a time, one moment at a time. Trust is built one action at a time. Same is true of legacy. What we repeat, others remember. What we practice, others inherit. So instead of saying I'm sorry, when I bump into someone and I say excuse me, because I'm reserving saying I'm sorry for when I really mean it. That's a shift. That's a different practice. Most legacies, they're not formed in dramatic moments. They're formed in our routines, in how we speak, in how we respond, whether we show up when it's inconvenient. Faithfulness compounds quietly, slowly, powerfully. Again, a godly inheritance is built quietly. You have legacy and surrender, trusting God with the future. I was riddled with fear when I got to recovery, when I was leaving my addiction. And I needed to learn to trust God, not only just trust God, but in trusting God with the future, that He was a part of it, that He was in the mix of it, that I didn't have to worry about the future because God was a part of it. Here's the freeing truth of the third step being applied to legacy. We are responsible for faithfulness. God is responsible for outcomes. Even in the ninth step, when we go to make amends, our job is to make the amends. How they receive it, what they do with it, that's not up to us. That's a God thing. Whether they forgive us or not, that's a God thing. God will orchestrate that. A godly inheritance doesn't require us to control the future. It requires us to trust God with it. Can you trust God today with your future? Do you have that amount of trust in your higher power? When we align our will with His, what we pass on reflects His character, not our fear. I want to reflect His heart. I want to reflect His nature, not mine. Less and less of me, more and more of God. This means we don't micromanage the next generations. We model surrender and let God do what only God can do. God, that's one of the promises. We realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Faithfulness today becomes freedom tomorrow, even if we never see it. A godly inheritance is spiritual, relational, intentional. It's shaped by daily surrender and long obedience. It doesn't require perfection, only faithfulness. If we struggle, if we stumble, we get up and we begin again. That's the heart of recovery. That's the heart of faith. If you're in recovery, you are already rewriting the story. Even choosing sobriety today is an act of generational healing. I love this concept. I hope you're encouraged. I hope it gets you thinking about what kind of legacy you can and will leave. Well, we have one final episode left, and we're going to turn the closing question of this series is going to be, what does it mean to finish well? And how do we sustain faith, recovery, and purpose over time. Not just start strong, but end faithfully. And so we'll tackle that in our final episode of Legacy Builders. And so hopefully, episode 4, Leaving a Godly Inheritance, really made an impact and encouraged you to be thinking about what that could look like. Thanks so much. As we close the latest episode of Legacy Builders, let's just slow down for a moment. Legacy is not something you build later. It's something you're shaping right now, which is why we chose to kick off the year 2026 with this series. How you show up, how you handle setbacks, how you speak, serve, and stay sober, it all matters. Recovery teaches us that consistency is what changes lives. Not dramatic moments, but faithful ones. Step 12 reminds us that what we've received is meant to be shared. Not perfectly, not even loudly, but honestly. And faith reminds us that God works through ordinary people who are simply willing to keep going. So here's a gentle question to carry with you. Who might be stronger tomorrow because you chose faithfulness today? You don't need a platform. You don't need a title. You don't have to have it all figured out. You only need to stay present, stay honest, stay available. If this episode stirred something in you, don't rush past it. Sit with it. Pray about it. Journal about it. Talk it through with someone you trust. And if you're walking this journey alongside others, a sponsor, a sponsee, a mentor, a friend, remember, you are building something that matters. As we continue this series, we'll continue this conversation of being a legacy builder. Now, we encourage you to be sure to like, to share, to subscribe, do all those great things. We want to just continue to increase the footprint of Studio RC. So until then, stay grounded, stay connected, and keep building what lasts. And remember, Recovery Church, 12 steps, one goal. God bless, and we'll see you next time.